shall not eat of every tree of the garden? You will not surely die, for God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.
Where are you?
I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself.
Who told you that you were naked? Because you have done this, you are cursed more than all cattle, and more than every beast of the field. On your belly you shall go, and you shall eat dust all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel.
I think the progress of the revolution has increased at a geometric rate in the last few months, particularly since the Negro leaders themselves have displaced white liberals in charge of the entire movement. This grew out of a policy that was adopted by the Negro leaders at a so-called summit conference at Arden House of Columbia University last Thanksgiving, where the entire Negro movement in the United States was identified with the movement for African nationalism in Africa. This is a development of extreme significance, I think, because it opens up the possibility for non-white domination of the United States through three means. One, through the mechanism of the United Nations. Two, through the Kennedy administration's increasing tendency to surrender our national sovereignty. And three, through massive colored immigration, which is favored by liberal elements in this country. It seems to me that this heightened pace of the revolution results from integration itself, for under segregation there was no such disturbance as this. And this is not entirely unreasonable, because these people have found, through encouragement of the President and the Attorney General, that it pays to get out in the streets and demonstrate and carry on. And I would predict that if the civil rights bills pass, it will mean further, more violent demonstrations. The strange thing is, and this is a great pity, that this entire integration movement is based on false legal grounds. The grounds being the so-called Supreme Court school integration decision of May 17, 1954. In the Stell case in Savannah, Georgia, which was decided recently, uncontradicted, unrefuted testimony showed that the factual basis of the Supreme Court decision was entirely wrong. The outcome of all this, I think, is to hasten a showdown as to whether the United States will remain a predominantly white nation with Western cultural values, or whether it will become increasingly Africanized.
Do you agree with this decision as
I certainly do.
Well, Senator, we're taught, although I'm not a lawyer, that all decisions handed down by court are based upon judicial history or judicial precedent, or by statute or by custom. And this decision, the court seems to me to have merely given their opinion. This is not based upon any legal reasoning.
Well, may I say that it overruled the Plessy versus Ferguson case, but that also was not based on any legal reasoning, because what the Supreme Court said in the Plessy case in 1896 was that the enforced separation of the two races stamps the colored race with a badge of inferiority solely because the colored race chooses to put that construction upon it.
Senator, with everyone reaching for court decisions here, I'm a little bit afraid that we're going to take too much time.
No, what I'm saying is that the decision now is much better psychology than the decision in 1896. It was also a psychological decision.
Mr. Green, can you hold just a minute? Let's have a question on this side of the aisle for a moment. Mr. Hollander.
Senator Daniels, of course, we of ADA have always been advocates of the end of segregation, so we're very happy about this decision, but we realize that there are many good people who are not, and who, like yourself, have said, as you said in the Senate the other day, that nevertheless this is the law of the land as it's written, and it's up to the people of the country to comply with it and still preserve the values of our public educational system. Don't you have confidence in the good sense and the goodwill of the people in this country, both North and South, to comply with this decision peacefully and in good faith?
Yes, that is my hope, that the decision, we can live under the decision and still maintain our public school systems and peace and order. Now, you understand that there are some people in both races, some agitators in both races who may cause trouble. I hope it will not come. I hope that we can work this matter out properly.
My name is Thomas J. Wesley, Jr. I'm a real estate man. I've lived in Atlanta all my life. My organization has over 5,000 members in Fulton County.
Now, what's the name of the organization?
The name of the organization is the Metropolitan Association to Continue Segregated Education.
Is that the sole purpose of the organization?
That's the sole purpose of the organization. Some of the people are saying, save our schools. We say, save our children first. The reasons for separation of the races are very important in the South. We want the Negroes to have full opportunity for self-advancement, but see no reason why this necessarily entails their forced inclusion into places where they are not suited.
Our nation had the May 17, 1954 Supreme Court decision translated into 42 languages and sent it around the world. The United States wanted the struggling, darker peoples to realize our sense of justice. As we publish our good things, Russia propagandizes our mistakes. Number two, we need more and better education for all. Democracy requires a higher level of intelligence than any other form of government, as the power is with the body politic. Less than 100 Negro students would be involved in Atlanta, thereabout. Where they live will determine where they attend school. We have the brains, the character, the goodwill, the religion, and the democratic desire to solve to the advantage of all the problem which is before us. We must give every child more and better education.
I'm representing about 120 parents, teachers, and students.
Did you have a poll?
We did not have a poll, but being a Christian school, we take the position of the Bible on all matters.
Which position do you take on this matter?
The position is number one.
Number one.
And I have a brief statement. That we believe that segregation is scriptural, reading directly from the Bible.
Give us the reference, if you don't mind.
Acts 17:26.
I'll go ahead.
That God determined the bounds of the habitations.
Go ahead.
We believe that segregation is constitutional, that Congress, the only body empowered by the Constitution to make laws, has not passed a desegregation law.
All right.
We feel that segregation is educationally sound, that it meets both races on their own level in homogeneous groups and best serves the purposes of both races. And we feel that integration is subversive in that it divides the people. It leads toward the communist goal of amalgamation of the races. It promotes centralization of power and uses the Negro to set up a police state with the federal government policing the situation.
Thank you very much.
I wish to say that the Negroes are our own people. They are 8th and 10th generation Southerners, fellow human beings and fellow Americans. They manifest the traditional Southern virtues of honor in dealing with an adversary, courage in adversity, and they are now practicing the traditional American virtue of taking responsibility for oneself by seeking to secure their rights as human beings. We, a small section of the world, cannot halt mankind's progress without the inevitable consequence of decline spiritually and materially. I am in favor of free, non-segregated schools for all our children, black and white, who are born equal in every respect except in the lack of opportunity that we whites, to our shame, inflict upon them, the colored ones.
And I like to think of our movement here in Montgomery as more than a boycott, because a boycott is suggestive merely of an economic squeeze, and that can be a very unchristian thing. It can be immoral.
You anticipate really a question I was going to ask you, how you would reconcile the Christian ethic with an economic boycott.
Well, I think if it stops with the boycott and it doesn't have the element of love and nonviolent resistance, it is opposed to the Christian religion. I face this problem at a very early stage in the whole struggle. How could this method be reconciled with the Christian faith? And at points I started thinking that this was a method used by persons at points who were seeking to defy the law of the land. And all of these things came to my mind. And then I reasoned that what we were actually doing was not exactly working on a negative, trying to put a company out of business. That was never our aim. We were not seeking to put the bus company out of business, but to put justice in business. We were dealing with a positive point. And I also reasoned that what we were doing turned out to be a very Christian act, because the system of segregation tends to set up false standards, and it scars the personality of the individuals of both races. And from that I came to see that the longer we continue to accept it without opposing it in some form, we fail to be our brother's keeper. Because as long as we sit in the back of the bus, it tends to give the Negro a false sense of inferiority, and so long as white persons sit in the front of the bus only, it tends to give them a false sense of superiority. And I felt that some leavening reality should come into being so men would live together as brothers and forget about distinctions, and that became, to my mind, a very moral element, and I came to see that what we were doing was actually massive non-cooperation and not so much a boycott.
Then you feel really that actually an acceptance of what you regard as evil is in essence a promotion of evil? Am I correct in understanding this was the basic philosophical thinking on your part?
Very definitely. I think it is just as bad to passively accept evil as it is to inflict it. My intellectual odyssey to pilgrimage to nonviolence is a rather long thing, but briefly I can state it, I think. The first thing that came to my mind in this area was my reading of Thoreau's essay on civil disobedience when I was a college student. And of course that fascinated me a great deal. It was one of the best things that I had read at that time. Later I went to theological seminary. There I came in contact with the whole stream of what is known as the social gospel, which was headed in this country by Rauschenbusch, who taught at one of the theological seminaries many years ago. And of course the emphasis there is that the Christian religion must not only be concerned about saving the individual soul, but also dealing with the social evils that corrupt the soul. So that I have been deeply influenced by the social gospel. And this caused me to become concerned about finding a method whereby social evils could be removed from society. And I think at that time I read most of the major social philosophers and social philosophies. I read the works of Marx and the whole communistic emphasis. And from the very beginning I was never moved by communism and its suggestions as to how to remove the problems that we confront in society.
And Gandhi?
Pardon?
Where did you come to Gandhi?
I came to Gandhi in the same setting in theological seminary days. I had heard of Gandhi, but I remembered hearing a message by the president of Howard University, Dr. Mordecai Johnson, who had just returned from India. He spoke in Philadelphia on his trip to India and the whole philosophy of Gandhi and passive and nonviolent resistance. Now, I was so deeply moved by the message that I went away and bought several books on the Gandhian, on Gandhi and Gandhian technique. And at that point, I became deeply influenced by Gandhi, never realizing that I would live in a situation where it would be useful and meaningful.
And actually used it in, actually would apply it in this country.
Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth of the Bethel Baptist Church is the Negro feared most by the white citizens of Birmingham. A militant leader, he has a faithful following. He has been the target of a mob, 2 bombings, and a long history of harassment. Reverend Shuttlesworth is the voice of the Negro in Birmingham, who no longer is willing to wait for the whites to make a move toward equality of the races. For the privilege of leading his people, he has paid a heavy penalty.
Reverend Shuttlesworth, what is life like for you in Birmingham?
Well, life for me, it's pretty difficult, if I could use that expression. I have to have somebody to guard my home at night. Been for 4 years. The police won't do it. It causes your family, wife and children, to go through severe strain and so forth. But we've learned to make out on it. We found out that if you can't take it, you can't make it. There have been 2 bombings there, and life is a struggle here for me in Birmingham, but it's a glorious struggle.
Would you care to tell us about the 2 bombings?
The first bombing was in December 1956, Christmas night, when somebody planted 12 sticks of dynamite between the church and the house where it was then, about that space, and you have to turn sideways to walk between. The dynamite was placed right at the corner of the church and the corner of the house, and that's where the head of my bed was, and I was in the bed, so that it blew the wall that was between my head and the dynamite away. It blew the floor from underneath the bed. We never did find where the springs went to. The front columns were blown into the street, and the roof came down, yet I didn't get a scratch. So I said that I was saved to lead the fight.
Reverend Shuttlesworth, how many times have you been beaten?
Well, physically, I've been mobbed once, badly. I have faced 2 mobs in this city. And of course, I have no doubt that I would have been beaten in the jails upon one of my arrests, but for the fact that there were several more men arrested with me. Some of the whites really wanted to get to me. I had no fear, however.
When you say you were badly beaten, how badly?
Quite badly. The first time I saw brass knuckles, I was being struck with them. This mob had chains, brass knuckles, sticks, and other things in front of Phillips High School in September '57, when we went down and tried to enroll the children, and this wrist was almost broken, and I was knocked to the ground, I guess 5 or 6 times. I was kicked. My face was terrifically scarred. The skin were all off my ears. My knees were badly scuffed up. I have scars now that are visible. Behind here, 1 or 2 in my head, 1 there. Now, you're conscious that they're trying to kill you. And really, this mob at this time weren't just trying to beat me up. They were trying to kill me. You see, actually, a mob is so bent on doing harm till they are not composed. And it's amazing how weak a person is who is a mobster at the time. My own personal feelings, I think that's what you want to get, is you feel sorry. You don't understand how men, otherwise calm, peaceable men, whether they be white or otherwise, could act worse than raving beasts, could just want blood, and no matter how they do, and they realize that The cameras were there. They realized they were being seen, but their hopes were to kill me, to get me. So you see, I've been near death 3 times in Birmingham.
A voice from Africa.
Our struggle,
Tom Maboya of Kenya.
Struggle, a human struggle. The struggle in Africa is one for nothing less and nothing more than the eradication of poverty, disease, and ignorance. And in this context, you and ourselves are all engaged in the same struggle that can aptly be summarized in terms of a struggle for political freedom, for economic opportunity, and for human dignity. This is my message to you. And I and millions of other people join you today in solidarity for the success of the struggle in which we are all involved. Thank you.
Oklahoma City, with its oil wells in the shadow of the state capitol, was basically a southern town. And here the very young led the assaults on racial barriers. For 5 years, they persistently demonstrated at lunch counters, department stores, and hotels. They won only small concessions. Then, late in May of this year, the dam broke. First a hotel, then a single restaurant, then another hotel. The battle had been won peacefully, and the youngsters celebrated.
My Lord, deliver, Daniel, deliver, Daniel, deliver, Daniel. It's my Lord, deliver, Daniel, and one heart every man. Deliver Daniel from the lion's den, John from the valley of the well, and the Hebrew children from the fiery furnace. One heart every man. It's my Lord, deliver, Daniel, deliver, Daniel, deliver, Daniel. It's my Lord, deliver, Daniel, and one heart every man.
Next target, a segregated amusement park called Wedgwood Village. The NAACP Youth Council demanded that it be integrated along with 2 other amusement centers. Wedgwood's owner, Maurice Woods, met with the youngsters, suggested 1 day a week integration, called for a gradual change.
Again, I want to say it's not a moral issue, it's strictly financial. And there have been several cases where situations such as mine have gone downhill because they integrated too quickly. The public wasn't ready for it. And we're going to try to work it out over a period of time. What that time will be, I can't say. But I do want to impress upon you that demonstrations are not the answer.
His answer came in the sober faces, and from Youth Council advisor, Mrs. Clara Looper.
I would like to give Mr. Maurice Woods some facts that he probably doesn't have. And it kind of grips me to hear an intelligent businessman say to the white people in Oklahoma City, you aren't ready to integrate an amusement park. And I would like to go over some facts with you. Oklahoma has always been a leader in the field of human relations. And the battlefield, the civil rights battlefield, has been fought here in Oklahoma, and we have taken more cases to the Supreme Court than any other state in the history of America. And we have been able to do it because of the fact that the whites and coloreds have worked together.
Subsequent demonstrations at the amusement park turned the tide. Wedgwood was integrated. Today, Maurice Woods says the move has cost him more than $1,000 a day in lost business, and he charges that the Negroes who wanted integration now are not supporting the park.
February 13th was our first sit-in Nashville. On this sit-in, we had about 130 kids. I think on this day, many of us didn't realize just how important our movement would grow to be.
The targets of the Nashville students were the lunch counter at the city's 2 largest department stores and 4 variety stores. And for the first time, the community was confronted with Negroes in places where they had never been.
You go to a counter. You do not request that the person sitting next to you get up and leave. You merely come in and sit down beside him, as any human being would do. You cause no violence. You have no angry words. You're friendly, and it sort of helps to project the idea that here sits beside me another human being.
Altogether, it was a moving feeling within me that I was sitting there demanding a God-given right, and my soul became satisfied that I was right in what I was doing. At the same time, with something deep down within me, moving me, that I could no longer be satisfied or go along with an evil system. That I had to be maladjusted to it. And in spite of all of this, I had to keep loving the people who denied me service, who stared at me.
During the early weeks of February 1960, the demonstrations that came to be called the sit-in movement exploded across the South. Within a period of 2 months, the movement had spread to 65 cities involving every southern state, with the exception of Mississippi. Early on the morning of April 19th, the violence in Nashville reached its climax with the dynamiting of a Negro home. This was the residence of Alexander Luby, a city councilman and leading Negro attorney.
He was Attorney Luby. He was our lawyer. He came to our defense when we were arrested that day, when we really needed something. And somebody had tried to kill him. We felt we had to confront the mayor with this thing. At first we didn't know quite what to do, but the idea of the massive walk seemed to emerge from everybody's mind, really. It was a spontaneous sort of thing. And we walked, we held our heads high because we were right. And we knew we were walking for something right. We were really striding toward freedom. It was a wonderful feeling. It was magnificent. We felt unity, we felt power, we felt strength. And it's not very often that a human being is exposed to such a raw feeling of goodness. I don't think any of us will ever forget it. Here was a situation in which two forces were meeting head-on, and there had to be a showdown. He had to say something.
Well, I felt like that here were a group of youngsters that were outraged because their leader's home had been dynamited. And I felt outraged along with them. And to that extent, we had a community of feeling between us that made me have a feeling that really we were after the same thing, and that I was as outraged as they were by this horrible thing, and that the great majority of the thinking white people were outraged by such a thing. We just couldn't let a thing like that happen. And so we had this discussion down here in front of the City Hall, and I was glad to discuss it with them.
Well, this was the very first time that I personally had ever felt the mayor's presence as a human being, because up until this moment he had always been a name on a sign that I had seen. But now I felt a real concern for him. I could sympathize with his situation because he was really on a spot. Here were 5,000 people who were really angry at him in a sense because we felt that he should have done something that he hadn't done, and we were telling him so. And I'm sure he must have felt rather alone at that moment.
I'd been asked, were you afraid? Of course I wasn't afraid. These children were emotionally upset, and I recognized that they were and tried to treat them with all due respect and courtesy and let them know that I was willing to meet with them there or any other way. But the mere fact that there were thousands of them didn't intimidate me in the least, and I tried to tell them factually and straightforward as I could that all the laws were going to be enforced, and that if they violated the law, they were going to be arrested too. But I did recognize that they were really upset about it, and I felt that they were justifiably upset about this horrible thing that had happened.
And we needed him to say integrate the counters, or to tell Nashville to do what Nashville knows it should have done a long time ago, like about 95 years ago after the Civil War. So I asked the mayor, first of all, Mayor West, do you feel that it's wrong to discriminate against a person solely on the basis of his race or color?
And so they asked me some pretty soul-searching questions. And one that was addressed to me as a man, and I tried as best I could to answer it, frankly and honestly, that I could not agree that it was morally right for someone to sell them merchandise and refuse them service. And I had to answer it just exactly that way.
And we were really very relieved. I think we were very pleased and very happy with our mayor at that moment. And we all applauded. And here was the situation that turned out right.
Of course, I received considerable criticism for it, but had I to answer it again, I would answer it in the same way again, because it was a moral question and was one that a man has to answer and not a politician.
I was to have tried to get onto the first Freedom bus that went south. People were injured on that bus. People were beaten in Alabama. This set up a guilt complex in me because Percy Sutton hadn't gone. Percy Sutton had stayed in New York. He excused himself by saying that he had work to do in the NAACP. He had cases in court. But deep down within Percy Sutton, he felt that he was afraid. And to live with Percy Sutton, I had to go. But I tell you, the most cruel thing that I experienced was not being in jail in Jackson, Mississippi, as they tried to brainwash me, as they do all who go to Jackson, Mississippi. But it was a ride from Atlanta, Georgia to Montgomery, Alabama. And it was a feeling of building fear as I rode in the front of a bus, just two of us, through hostile territory. A territory that I had been through before, in which I had always ridden in the back of the bus because I didn't have guts to get in the front of the bus. But now the time had come. I was riding in the front of the bus. I don't remember how many hours it was from Atlanta, but if it was 6 hours, actually by trip, it was 60 hours of the fear of the mind. So much so had this tension built up that as we went through the countryside and we looked out and I saw the red clay, we passed Tuskegee Institute, where I had gone to school under segregated circumstances, where I had been in the Air Force as a Negro cadet, where I had graduated as a Negro officer who could not eat in the White Officers Club as I prepared to go and fight the American cause. I looked at Tuskegee. I was so doggone scared. Not afraid, scared. That I wanted to get off the bus, get out, and stay at Tuskegee. Tuskegee was a familiar name. Montgomery was a place of hostility. Montgomery, I remembered from 1940. I remembered Montgomery from the Capitol. It's the capital of Alabama. On the Capitol steps, a shoeshine boy, not more than 18, head split open from behind, and blood streaming, somehow gushing over the front of his face and down. This was 1940, but that has always symbolized Montgomery, Alabama to me. Finally, we arrived in Montgomery. We were going into Montgomery, as we later found out, in the face of a court order, a federal court order that said no one would go in as a freedom rider. This was Montgomery. This was the hostile Montgomery in which the beatings had just taken place a few days prior to this of the Freedom Riders. We pulled into the bus station of Montgomery, Alabama, and now the moment of truth had arrived. The bus pulled into the station. I got ready to get up and started to stand, and my legs wouldn't hold me. This is fear. Now, fear from what? Fear from riding into the bus station? No. Fear compounded from Percy Sutton, who couldn't go to the white playground as a kid. Percy Sutton, who was put off a train as an officer, a captain, in Texarkana in 1945 when he had returned from fighting a war for his country. These were the fears that come up over the years. And what have they done to Percy Sutton? They had stilled his legs as effectively as if a nerve had been sat upon. And they were cold, and I had to massage my legs to get up, to get off the bus. And this was fear. Fear that no one else would experience except the Negro. Fear from conditioning, and it's a cruel sort.
Besides segregated lunch counters and parks, another target is the public library, where Negroes must enter through the basement and are not allowed to browse.
You should have been down there to see those students this afternoon at that library. Now, when the kids went down, the library was open. And when they were approaching the entrance, the white man walked in before them, and I assumed that he notified the people that the teenagers were on their way. When they got there, a man held the door closed and then locked it. And so they weren't admitted in. So they crowded to the entrance, and they stood there for a minute, and then they kneeled down and sung some songs. And then they prayed. But you should have been down there this afternoon to see 15 young people down on their knees, crowded at the entrance of the library, singing and praying. And this is unusual for a bunch of teenagers. I mean, these kids, I doubt if any of them were over 15 years of age, singing and praying. And knowing what they were, they knew what they were doing. They knew what they were doing. And they meant what they were doing from the depth of their heart. In the church today, we got up, just like we said here, the kids discussed it. It was their own decision. Nobody pushed them into it. And they didn't walk to the paddy wagon. They were limp.
Nonviolent direct action in action. One of the exponents of this technique is the Reverend Wyatt T. Walker of Atlanta, who travels as an aide to Martin Luther King. Eyewitness reporter Philip Scheffler asked him whether he thought his group had made any impact on the conscience of Albany.
I think we have. Here again is a reservation that many people who do not quite understand what we're doing, this is one of the reservations that they hold. They say you can't change men's hearts. We may not change the immediate opposition, but the use and the technique of the nonviolent direct action program flushes the system of segregation into the public arena, where people's minds and eyes and ears have to grapple with the rightness or wrongness of it. And whereas we might not steer Chief Pritchett's conscience or Mayor Kelly's conscience, there are many moderate whites who have not clearly seen the issues because they have been shut off from what the real plight of the Negro is. And when this is
why have they been shut off from this?
Well, here again is a biblical similarity. I suppose the greatest insult that there can be to a people is to be ignored. And the Negro community, by and large, has been ignored as an entity in the communities in the South.
Do you think really that these white people, even those of we'll say, potential good feeling, don't or haven't really known what it's like to be a Negro in the South?
I don't think any white person can really understand what it is to be a Negro in America.
If you just take a good look at this Mississippi River and then think and then count, and you come up with a large number of Negroes who've been found floating down this river from one century to another, and you begin to wonder what we really want. Well, it's one word: protection. At one time they lynched Negroes and they threw them in the Mississippi River. Now they arrest them, beat them with clubs, and then find them guilty in the courtroom. Time hasn't changed very much. It's just changed from one form into another. We need anti-lynching laws. We need laws that will guarantee criminal justice in the courtrooms of the South. And we need laws that will guarantee fair law enforcement. In short, we need protection. And exactly what Negroes want today is in this line of protection. In voter registration, we think that we might be able to somehow change the entire picture, and by which Negroes walk into a courtroom, they receive justice. And at no time will we find our people floating down the Mississippi River.
As a high point of the voter registration campaign, the National Executive Secretary of the Corps, James Farmer, had been scheduled to address a mass rally in Plaquemine. However, the recent events produced a somewhat different outcome.
Your spirit is greater than the spirit I've seen in Mississippi or Alabama. So we're marching all over the country, you see. We have many weapons. One great weapon is our own bodies as we march and we picket and we sit in all over the country. You have power. You have found that power. 25 of your people are in jail, and you march downtown to the jailhouse. And you know what happened? The next day they were turned loose. You have a great fight going on here in this parish and in this city. I understand that there's one little section that should be a part of this city that is not in it. DuPont Annex. Now, you know very well why it is that they have not included DuPont Annex and Seymourville into the city of Plaquemine. You know why. Vote, 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 vote. They are afraid of your votes. But you have every right to be a part of that city. You know, they've tried it in Tuskegee, Alabama. They have tried to gerrymander the Negroes outside of the city. They had been in, but once the Negroes registered and voted, then they redistricted the lines and moved the Negroes outside of the city. Well, they're doing the same thing here, you see, because of your vote. They are refusing to take you in to the city. Now, you can stop it, you know. The same way Tuskegee Institute did. You know how they did it? They said very well, if you don't let us in the city, don't let us vote in the city, we will stop spending our money in that city. I think you can break it. Make your demands for inclusion and incorporation into the city for both DuPont Annex and Seymourville. If they refuse, then make it plain that you are not going to spend one more green Yankee dollar. My friends, my Christian friends, nobody ever respects you unless you respect yourself.
Just the other day, a Negro minister was arrested. And moments after his arrested, his family picked up guns to protect their own homes because they definitely could not secure protection from the law officials. So we have depended upon God so long, and we will continue to depend upon God. But the only problem now is to whether or not we'll be able to wait on God. And this is the problem that we have in the Deep South. Depending upon the federal government, how long can we wait on the federal government? And definitely suppression will not breed love continuously.
What happens when the youngsters go into communities in which they don't live? How do you go about setting up a program there?
Well, usually we have a survey team of 2 people. Let us just take a case study. Greenwood, Mississippi, where Sam Block and Willie Peacock went there last August. But it's about 5 or 6 months before you really form a beachhead, because during that time, they encountered many patterns of resistance. I mean, for instance, the first building where they had an office, the owner was intimidated. White people came up the stairs with chains trying to lynch them. Churches refused to open up. And it's just a general pattern of fear.
Do you have to wait until a crisis or some dramatic incident occurs before you get cooperation in the Negro community?
It depends on the area. In these hardcore areas of Mississippi where we work, and of course Alabama and Georgia too, there's just so much fear. The people have been brainwashed actually by the local segregationists. And while you plug away, it's usually a crisis, which is a turning point. And of course, we don't try to make a crisis, and I guess that just evolves out of the nature of the work that we do.
What are the main dangers that your members face when they're actually in the field trying to increase the number of Negroes who are eligible to vote in the South?
Police brutality is the #1 problem in the South. Police brutality. We have right now in Ittabina, Mississippi, 45 people who are in jail. This is a form of intimidation and brutality.
Is this rather common?
This is common. This is common. If you don't have the overt violence, such as the shooting of Jimmy Travis, the beating of one of our workers in Alabama who's been registering voters by 10 state troopers.
How frequently does this type of thing occur?
Well, in some form or other, I think it occurs almost once a week, if not more. And this is not to mention the constant patterns of harassment inflicted upon the local people.
How do you go about trying to educate a community so that you can do your work effectively?
Well, one, we try to explain to them that we're going to be there. I think that the greatest fear that the people have is the fear that we will leave them, start something, and won't be there. And then we explain that we are sacrificing, that we are trying to work for perhaps no more money than they make on their jobs, so that we can identify with them. For instance, in Mississippi, most of us wear overalls, because this is important. You see, you go down there with a suit and a tie, and the local people feel that perhaps you're being uppity. If you are there sort of identifying with the earth as they do, in a sense, there's a greater rapport between you and them, and then they don't feel self-conscious. Then we tell them about our own experiences, our own sufferings, and then try to get them to discuss their own fears. Canvas, we make friends with the young people. All of this is
You try to blend into the community. You live with the people.
That is correct. That is correct. Wherever we possibly can, we try to live with them.
In the fall of 1962, a group of students arrived in Greenwood. They came to organize the Negro population, to spread the word of the new gospel. They called themselves SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. This is their headquarters, almost always filled with young people. They come to sing songs, borrow books, get a meal, or just sit and talk, but mostly to work. The objective of SNCC is the vote. The Negro in Mississippi has 45% of the population, yet less than 7% are registered. And the Negro leaders know that their people must get the vote if their lives are to change. The leader of SNCC in Mississippi is Bob Moses.
Well, we've got right now several very crucial problems facing us. First place, last year here in LaFleur County they had a bumper crop. But they had a dry season, and most of the people didn't get a chance to pick a lot of cotton, and so there were a lot of people all winter long who really were starving and didn't have food and clothing for their kids. Now this winter is going to be worse, and my feeling is that it'll get worse every year because they're perfecting these machines and the means of mechanizing the cotton crop. And so essentially we're in a race between whether or not we get the vote before the people are kicked out of their jobs and are forced to move in the cities and up north.
In Mississippi, the one job a Negro could always count on was work in the cotton fields at 30 cents an hour. But machinery is now taking the place of hand labor, and unemployment among the Negroes has soared. More and more, they have to choose between moving north or going on relief, which is controlled by the whites. Their leaders feel that if they are to help themselves, they must get the vote now. But in Mississippi, registering to vote is more than just writing your name and address. You must interpret a section of the state constitution to the satisfaction of the voting registrar, who is white. SNCC is conducting classes all over the state. Courses on the voter registration test, literacy classes, courses in nonviolent action. Nonviolent action does not come easily. Sam Block has been shot at twice, so has Bob Moses.
Well, but the few things that you have to consider is that one, this is the home of the Citizens Council, and all the city officials are Citizens Council people. Two is that the people who've done the killing have been business people. The guy who shot at Jimmy and myself, they were salesmen, they were respectable people from the community. They weren't white trash. So how do you jive that with the fact that they're also rational people? It seems to me that they're caught in a circle which, if there are people who want to break out, they don't know how. They don't have a chance. White people are probably more oppressed, or in terms of their ability to speak, than Negroes.
This is Birmingham, the South's mightiest industrial city as the world knew it this week. These are the front lines of the battle between Dr. Martin Luther King's Negro Disciples of Nonviolence and the uniformed forces of Birmingham, led by Commissioner Eugene Bull Connor, who says, "We were trying to be nice to them, but they won't let us be." The Negro leaders say this will lay the whole issue before the conscience of the community and the nation. The scene is last Saturday. The sights and sounds filmed and recorded as they happened. The place is near the 16th Street Baptist Church, the starting point for Negro demonstrations. For a month, the two communities, Negro and white in Birmingham, had been building up to scenes, to clashes like this. Tempers had worn thin on both sides. The situation was perilously close to an explosion.
Break the boulders up here, they're throwing on.
Sometimes the Negroes were not able to contain their anger, to remain non-violent, and they fought back. They threw rocks and broken bottles. There were reports that some of them had knives and guns. But Negro leaders said those people were not their followers. They were, they said, onlookers drawn in by what they saw. There were injuries on this day, and the violence prompted an appeal from one of the Negro leaders. The Reverend James Beeville borrowed a police bullhorn and told the crowds to disperse if they weren't going to demonstrate in a non-violent way. Arrests were made in mass lots, everyone charged with the same offense, parading without a permit. The Negroes had asked for permits and had been denied them. City police were carrying out their pledge to fill their jails to capacity if necessary. They are acting according to the wishes of Bull Connor, the police commissioner, who has set the segregationist tone of the city for many years. In the face of Negro resistance, Commissioner Connor has said repeatedly that he'll never back down. It was against this background that Dr. King was asked what he meant when he said that achievement of a breakthrough in Birmingham could crack the whole South.
Well, Birmingham is a symbol of hardcore resistance to integration. It is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States, and it has had more unsolved bombings of Negro homes and churches than any city in the United States. And the injustices inflicted upon Negroes are notorious realities. Consequently, I have the feeling that if we can get a breakthrough in Birmingham and really break down the walls of segregation, it will demonstrate to the whole South, at least the hardcore South, that it can no longer resist integration. And I think everybody will find themselves going along with it if we can get a breakthrough here in Birmingham.
But it seemed to me that what happened in Birmingham, Alabama, the police dogs and the several days of brutality there, and television enabling people all over this country to see what was going on, newspapers writing about it. This really seemed to me to change the pattern almost overnight. I think it was said of Lincoln's proclamation ending slavery that the sparks from it fell on every state in the Union. And it seemed to me that the outrage in Birmingham, the sparks from this fell on every state in the Union. Now, this changed things. This is what opened up demands for civil rights in the North, East, and West. So that now I think this is a national thing. We're a part of it. We're lucky to have gotten so well on the way, but we're a part of what now is, without question, a national involvement.
Even the name of the main street in Cambridge, Maryland, Race Street, symbolizes the gulf between Negroes and whites in this Eastern Shore community of 12,000 people. This narrow main street divides the two communities geographically. A long campaign of demonstrations studded with violence has driven them further apart racially. The demonstrations and the violence brought the Maryland National Guard here in force to maintain order. The Guardsmen still stand watch in Cambridge, olive drab dressing for deep racial wounds that have not yet healed. The desegregation campaign was organized by the so-called Cambridge Nonviolent Action Committee, with total integration as its goal. It was headed by Gloria Richardson, a militant leader. Along the way, nonviolent action too often became violent. The first explosion came in June, After a long series of demonstrations, arrests, more demonstrations, more arrests, truces, stalled negotiations, broken promises, and charges of bad faith from both sides. Rioting rocked the city on June 11th, following a Negro march to protest against the sentencing of 2 juvenile demonstrators to correction homes. 2 days later, a huge throng of counter-demonstrating whites were blocked by police and state troopers from surging into the Negro district. With the city on the verge of war, Governor Millard Tawes ordered the National Guard into Cambridge to maintain a civilian and military government. Modified martial law, including a nighttime curfew, smothered the violent outbreak. During the next 3 weeks, negotiations sputtered and stalled, while tensions smoldered beneath the tending of the Guard. On July 8th, the Guard was pulled out. Demonstrations resumed immediately. A corner restaurant known as Disneyland became one of the most improbable focal points of national attention when owner Robert Fazenfeld smeared a kneeling demonstrator with raw egg. Afterward, NBC reporter Jack Perkins talked with a repentant Mr. Fazenfeld.
You saw yourself on television last Monday night, saw a very hateful man. Are you that kind of man?
Well, I would say I'm just an ordinary American who feels that he has a right to defend his livelihood. I hope it never happens again either, as far as that goes. I would rather go out of business to participate in anything like this again.
Violence flared again after a prayer meeting at the courthouse. Shots were fired by snipers in the dark. The mood of the city was one of bitter anger on both sides.
They keep thinking we begging them for something. We ain't begging for nothing. We're telling them what is ours right now. And we letting them know that we ain't turning around. Like that song Jim sang, we mean that. We'll never turn back.
But they can come in town picking it, but no white people can't go out there. That's one thing right now. That's all I got to say. It's all one-sided. And the newspapers and the TV camera all one-sided, too. They take pictures when they want to take pictures, and they print what they want to print on the other side of town. That's on Pine Street.
That won't get printed.
That's right. Yeah.
That'll be on there. Tell them they better get printed or they won't be able to come.
If I think myself black, got to be on TV every night.
3 days after the Guardsmen left, they were back. Again, the curfew, stricter this time.
Demonstrations of all types are prohibited. All stores will be closed at 7 p.m. Curfew at 9 p.m.
Please obey the curfew. We will not have demonstrations tonight or a mass rally. We're meeting with the Attorney General of the United States. He's working on some solution for campus. So please, obey the curfew. Please obey the curfew.
Guardsmen used tear gas to break up another Negro protest, and even guardsmen became the targets of the snipers. The shockwaves of the violence reached even to the White House. President Kennedy rebuked the demonstrators for having lost sight of their objectives. Governor Tawes appealed for a solution to satisfy what he called the legitimate pleas of Negroes for equality. Finally, on July 23rd, a solution was announced in Washington after long hours of hard bargaining directed by Attorney General Robert Kennedy. It called for completion of desegregation in public schools, formation of a biracial committee, construction of a federally sponsored housing project, a Negro interviewer at the State Employment Office, and a controversial amendment to the city charter providing for desegregation of public accommodation.
For the president to speak out for racial equality as a moral issue. But a strong speech could cost the president Southern support for new civil rights legislation he would like to have.
Okay, let's get started now.
The president must decide whether or not to speak out anyway in a nationwide TV address.
Next question, which we can take up now, Mr. President, is whether you're going to make a nationwide TV address in connection with setting up the message.
I didn't think so. It just really depends on whether we have something trouble on the university, then I would. But otherwise, I didn't think that we would at this point. I think it'd be helpful. I think it's a reason to do it. I think you get to talk about the legislation and talk about employment and talk about education. To do it for 15 minutes, I think, would alleviate a lot of problems.
Well, we could do it, I suppose we could do it. I don't think we want to do it a half hour.
I think it would take away a lot of the problems that we're having at the present time.
It's going to be helpful to legislate.
You mean in the legislation?
Is it going to be helpful to bring about an action of this legislation?
Yeah. Because I think he's going to come across reasonable and understanding. And
he's going to make a speech and nothing's going to happen, I would presume.
Oh, but he's going to introduce the legislation. Well, I think he can say that. They're going to have some difficulties, and then describe the fact that we're going to have problems during this summer. We hope that the fact that we're making this kind of effort at the federal level, that Negroes would understand their responsibilities. And
yeah, I don't.
Legislative is going to hurt much more.
Right.
I think you get to the real nut of this thing on the Hill, and that's when you may want to do this.
Well, then you're going to have. That's not going to be September, October, November. I don't think you can get by now without having an address on television. At least during
Larry O'Brien is expressing some concern as to whether or not the president making a speech would be helpful. You had all of the states in the South, in effect, enforcing segregation in a system less than, but not unlike, South Africa, the apartheid system. And the president knew that he would have a long, long, hard fight through the Congress to enact any civil rights legislation.
I guess we're going to get something ready anyway, because it may be that tomorrow. Well, we got a draft, which doesn't fit all these points, but it's something to work with. And there's some pretty good sentences and paragraphs.
All right. We're going to be here, and it'll help us get ready anyway, because we may want to do it tomorrow. Okay.
We are confronted primarily with a moral issue. It is as old as the scriptures and is as clear as the American Constitution. The heart of the question is whether all Americans are to be afforded equal rights and equal opportunities, whether we are going to treat our fellow Americans as we want to be treated. If an American, because his skin is dark, cannot eat lunch in a restaurant open to the public, if he cannot send his children to the best public school available, if he cannot vote for the public officials who represent him, if, in short, he cannot enjoy the full and free life which all of us want, then who among us would be content to have the color of his skin changed and stand in his place? Who among us would then be content with the counsels of patience and delay? 100 years of delay have passed since President Lincoln freed the slaves, yet their heirs, their grandsons, are not fully free. They are not yet freed from the bonds of injustice. They are not yet freed from social and economic oppression. And this nation, for all its hopes and all its boasts, will not be fully free until all its citizens are free. We preach freedom around the world, and we mean it. And we cherish our freedom here at home. But are we to say to the world, and much more importantly, to each other, that this is a land of the free, except for the Negroes? That we have no second-class citizens, except Negroes? That we have no class or caste system, no ghettos, no master race, except with respect to Negroes? Now the time has come for this nation to fulfill its promise. We have a right to expect that the Negro community will be responsible, will uphold the law, but they have a right to expect that the law will be fair, that the Constitution will be colorblind, as Justice Harlan said at the turn of the century. This is what we're talking about, and this is a matter which concerns this country and what it stands for. And in meeting it, I ask the support of all of our citizens. Thank you very much.
Now, as you said earlier, the president is talking about new legislation and to put it, take it out of the streets and put it back in the courts. Why? As long as it's in the streets, it's in the hands of the masses of black people who will not compromise or who cannot be bought out. But when you put it back in the courts, then that puts it back into the hands of the hand-picked Negro leaders who will allow the judges and the other persons that are involved in this white power structure to slow them down. It's only a trick. And as long as the masses of black people are involved in the struggle for freedom, not integration, but freedom, the respect as human beings, respect as men, and show that they're willing to die to be respected as men, then the power structure sits up and takes notice. But as long as this mass element is led, and when I say led, I use led in quotes, actually contained by Uncle Tom Negro leaders who hold them back, who tell them turn the other cheek, and things like that, then the white power structure isn't worried at all. They're only worried when they know that the masses of black people are ready to explode, and in exploding it will destroy some of the furniture in their house, and then they react accordingly.
Mr. Morris? Well, I believe that the dominant interests in our society, which are white, of course, are extremely worried that their system will be seriously damaged. It is disrupted now, and they want to halt the disruption which is being caused by the rising wave of militancy among Negroes all over the country. President Kennedy, in commenting on the efforts and the methods being used by American Negroes to gain their ends and their goals, which simply stated are unrestricted access to citizenship rights, said that it is better to settle these matters in the courts than on the streets. But the Negro started out trying to settle his problems and to correct his disadvantages and destroy the basis for his struggle and eliminate the grievances, very serious grievances he had in the courts. Our NAACP was set up on the basis of legal struggle and legal tactics alone, and it has had to revise its whole approach to the question.
And yet, Mr. Morrison, it seems to me that the president was saying that while he seeks to remove the struggle from the streets, that the courts have gone quite far, that the presidential office, the executive branch of our government, in the president's terms, has made certain steps, and he seems to be saying more now. He says, we face, therefore, a moral crisis as a country and a people. It cannot be met by repressive police action. It cannot be left to increase demonstrations in the streets. It cannot be quieted by token moves or talk. It is time to act in the Congress, in your state and local legislative body, and above all, in all of our daily lives, which is more than saying, let's send it back to the courts.
Why didn't he say this 3 years ago? Why didn't he say this when all of these sit-ins and freedom rides were very peacefully going on in the South and in other parts of the North? The man didn't say anything until he found out that black people in this country were ready to explode. And as soon as he saw that the explosion then was a threat to the white society, he came up with this mealy-mouthed speech, which is too late, and it's only a speech. We still don't see any actions that have stemmed from it. It's still only in the stage of words.
I think the speech is late, Minister Malcolm X, but not too late. No pronouncement that was that impressive and forthright from a president of the United States.
No one made a better pronouncement than Abraham Lincoln made 100 years ago, and that still hasn't been put into practice. It's still a pronouncement.
Sir, I applaud words for what words are worth, and those were good and beautiful words. Now we want to see the president follow up these words with deeds, because we will judge him in the next election. We will judge the entire administration, not by the beauty of the words which they uttered, nor the soundness of those words. We will judge them by what they do. Now, what can he do? He will propose legislation. This legislation must be forthright and powerful legislation, covering the whole gamut of discrimination against Negroes in housing, in employment, in schools, in public places. It must strike at the very root of segregation and prejudice. The president must do more than propose the legislation. He must get out and...
Look at you, learn from the world you live in, brother. That's why I ain't teach you nothing in this book, but it's what you want to know. You ain't gonna know nothing about it. He's not even teaching me about the future of my people. What you going to school for then, dummy? We don't even have a country. I know that. Do we have a country? You say the United States is your country, which is not your country. What flag on a black man's flag? You have no flag, brother. No flag at all. I mean, we not gonna get nothing. Not by sitting around here doing these sit-in demonstrations and nothing. People not gonna do anything. Well, how are we going to do it? By violence. Violence.
About uprising, having a revolution.
But there are 20 million of us.
20 million. That's enough.
Not these days and not in those terms.
Oh, it's enough.
They're scattered. 48 states.
48 states, get them together.
How?
Through Islam.
What?
The true religion, you know? Get all the people together, get all to believe in one thing, and then they can't help but stick together. I mean, we can't stick together now. Half of us Christians, the other half Baptists, you know, some Jews and all that. Now, what good is that going to do us?
Catholic. So you think the only thing we can do
is get together.
Have an armed uprising?
Really? Just put blood, you know, let everybody bleed a little bit. That's the only way we're going to get anything. What happened to the people in Birmingham?
Well, Birmingham isn't over yet.
It's over. Oh, yeah, it's over. It's over. It's over. They done sent in the state troopers, the federal. It's all over now. People, they had a little old show Sunday night, you know. That was the only thing they did. When they was marching around in them thousands and thousands, wasn't nothing happening. They got mad Sunday. Jumped on a few of them. Sent a few of them to the hospital. And then what happened? They said, we're going to give you what you want, huh? Yeah. That ain't nothing. Ain't going to get nothing.
The captain said yesterday, I got no country, I got no flag. And it isn't because he was born paranoid that he said that. It's because the performance of the country for his 18 years on Earth has proven that to him. Now, how one manages to make these people, these blind people, begin to see. But they babe at that building. It has absolutely no foundation. And it really does not have any foundation. It's going to come down, one way or another. Either we will correct what's wrong, or it'll be corrected for us.
200,000 Americans, most of them Negroes, but many of them whites, marched through the streets of Washington to assemble at the Lincoln Memorial. Less than 3 weeks later, on Sunday, September 15th, a Negro church in Birmingham, Alabama was bombed in the midst of Sunday school classes, 4 children killed. The effect of these events on the Judiciary Subcommittee is recalled by a member, Wisconsin Democrat Robert W. Kastenmeier.
I perceived a change in attitude among at least a critical number of members of the subcommittee toward a more fuller commitment in terms of what the bill ought to be like. And while this wasn't satisfactory to all in the subcommittee, gradually the bill shaped into something even stronger, in fact much stronger than the administration bill.
The subcommittee's bill was reported out to the full Judiciary Committee on October 2nd. It was hailed by civil rights leaders as the finest bill of its kind, much better than the original administration bill. It was denounced as stringent and drastic by others, including key Republican congressmen whose votes the administration believed were essential for the passage of any civil rights bill. One of these was the ranking Republican member of the Judiciary Committee, Congressman William M. McCulloch of Ohio.
There was some likelihood that if the drastic, strong subcommittee bill were reported to the House, that it would there be amended unto death, and probably the final result would have been referring the bill back to the committee for further study.
When the full 35-man Judiciary Committee assembled in their third-floor committee room to consider this hotly contested bill, Attorney General Robert Kennedy responded to a request that he come and give his opinion of it.
Well, I thought it was a wrong bill, and as I say, I think that it hurt the original bill in some places, and also gave power, which I thought, to the executive branch of government and the Department of Justice, which was very dangerous. So I was opposed to it for those 2 reasons. Then also, that even if they had reported the bill out, because of the obvious deficiencies in the bill wouldn't have...
I think the progress of the revolution has increased at a geometric rate in the last few months, particularly since the Negro leaders themselves have displaced white liberals in charge of the entire movement. This grew out of a policy that was adopted by the Negro leaders at a so-called summit conference at Arden House at Columbia University last Thanksgiving, where the entire Negro movement in the United States was identified with the movement for African nationalism in Africa. This is a development of extreme significance, I think, because it opens up the possibility for non-white domination of the United States through three means. One, through the mechanism of the United Nations. Two, through the Kennedy administration's increasing tendency to surrender our national sovereignty. And three, through massive colored immigration, which is favored by liberal elements in this country. It seems to me that this heightened pace of the revolution results from integration itself. For under segregation, there was no such disturbance as this. And this is not entirely unreasonable because these people have found, through encouragement of the President and the Attorney General, that it pays to get out in the streets and demonstrate and carry on. And I would predict that if the civil rights bills pass, it will mean further, more violent demonstrations. The strange thing is, and this is a great pity, that this entire integration movement is based on false legal grounds. The grounds being the so-called Supreme Court school integration decision of May 17, 1954. In the Stell case in Savannah, Georgia, which was decided recently, uncontradicted, unrefuted testimony showed that the factual basis of the Supreme Court decision was entirely wrong. The outcome of all this, I think, is to hasten a showdown as to whether the United States will remain a predominantly white nation with Western cultural values, or whether it will become increasingly Africanized.
My God, whom I praise, do not remain silent, for people who are wicked and deceitful have opened their mouths against me. They have spoken against me with lying tongues. With words of hatred they surround me. They attack me without cause. In return for my they accuse me. But I am a man of prayer. They repay me evil for good and hatred for my Appoint someone evil to oppose my enemy. Let an accuser stand at his right hand. When he is tried, let him be found guilty, and may his prayers condemn him. May his days be few. May another take his place of leadership. May his children be fatherless, and his wife a widow. May his children be wandering beggars. May they be driven from their ruined homes. May a creditor seize all he has. May strangers plunder the fruits of his labor. May no iniquity of his fathers be remembered, kindness to him, or take pity on his fatherless children. May his descendants be cut off, their names blotted out from the next generation. May kindness be remembered before the Lord. May the sin of his mother never be blotted out. May their sins always remain before the Lord, that he may blot out their name from the earth. For he never thought of doing this, but hounded to death the poor and the needy and the broken-hearted. He loved to pronounce a curse. May it come back on God. He found no pleasure in blessing. May it be far from him. He wore cursing at his woman. It entered into his body like water, into his bones like oil. May it be like a cloak wrapped about him, like a belt tied for him. May this be the Lord's payment to my accusers, to those who speak evil of me. But you, sovereign Lord, help me for your name's sake. Out of the goodness of your love, deliver me.